So I'd like to start today's webinar with a very brief discussion on digital transformation. And why? Well, digital transformation is a really a driving force in many IT organizations today, and it's responsible for much of the development that's occurring. And process and user story plays a very significant role in the development space. So I just want to, frame things in terms of the digital transformation. But something about digital transformation that probably all of you realize, it's really a much overused buzzword. So I'd like to spend a moment just getting us all on the same page because it could mean different things to different people. So just to get us all on the same page, I went and did some research and looked at different definitions of digital transformation. And one of those definitions that really resonated with me was one that I found from Gartner. So they go on to say that digital transformation can refer to anything from IT modernization. So, for example, let's taking a legacy system and moving it to the cloud, perhaps. Digital optimization, that's something near and dear to my heart. It's taking business processes and automating them, optimizing and automating them on a platform to the intention of completely new digital models. So examples of those, Airbnb, that never existed before. Uber, that was something that didn't exist. So created whole new operating models on a digital transformation platform. So that's one definition. But more and more today, this term is being widely used in many organizations to refer to initiatives such as putting services online. So perhaps your local or state government is putting online license renewal for your driver's license, or perhaps legacy modernization of old systems. But the fact is, organizations have been undertaking digital transformations since the very first commercial computer was launched back in the 50s. UNIVAC 1, that was one of the first commercial computers in the United States. It was purchased to actually automate the census, be able to help capture the results of the census and tabulate them. And I think it was the IBM 710 was one of the first commercial computers in the 50s that went into insurance companies, where they were transforming manual processes to automated processes. So, it is a buzzword, but it's actually something we've been doing for a long time. And I'd just like to say that, another way you can sort of look at digital transformation, at least in today's world, is a significant IT project, something significant, something with sponsorship, business objectives, a budget, resources, schedule. We're not talking about routine maintenance here, but something significant. So I'm going to be framing the conversation of digital transformation within these terms. So given that, I thought we'd give the opportunity for the audience just to provide some feedback so I kind of have a sense of where everybody is in terms of this. So are you currently involved in a digital transformation initiative? You can either be actively undertaking one, you maybe just recently completed, you're soon to be involved in one, or perhaps nothing's going on. So I'm going to ask Catherine to launch the poll. You'll get a chance to provide your results. We'll just give it 30 seconds or so as the results come in. And once we get a significant number of the people voted, so we're at about 40%. Oh wow, this is pretty cool. We're at about 60% of the people voted. I'll just give it another 30 seconds here, perhaps to let everyone get a chance to put it in. All right. We've almost got everybody. I'll just let it go for another maybe 5 seconds. All right, I think we have a good sample here. So can you show the results of the poll, please, Catherine? So if you take a look at the sharing, okay, we got the poll results here. So it looks like 66% of you are currently involved. So that's a significant majority. A couple of you, 4%, have just completed. 14% are about to embark, and about 16% of you are not really aware or involved in any initiatives in your organization. That doesn't mean they aren't happening, but organizations can be very large and complex. So that's great. So a significant number of you are actually involved or about to be involved in it. So thank you, Catherine. So for those of you involved and actively involved, And can you close that? Well, maybe I have to close that. There we go. So for those of you that are active and involved, there's a number that I think is pretty important, a very significant number that you guys should be aware of. And that is the fact that 75%, that's a significant number. Now, what 75% of what? So the fact is 75% of digital transformation initiatives will fail to meet their objectives. 75%. And this isn't, a number we came up with. I did a study, and I took an aggregate actually of studies from the Boston Group, Capgemini, the Everest Group, KPMG, McKinsey and Company, and basically 75% of digital transformation initiatives will fail to meet the business objectives. So what does this mean to your organization? I think it has a significant impact. Now, before I really discuss that, I want to just bring up another statistic. So IDC, which is a large industry analyst firm, they did a research, and they found that digital transformation investment is growing at a compound annual rate of 17.5% and is expected to approach 7.1 trillion. That's trillion with a T by 2023. That's a huge amount of money. I mean, by any standard, 7.1 trillion. So what does this mean to your organization? Well, a digital transformation failure in your company could easily represent tens of millions of dollars in waste. It can negatively impact your customers, and it can expose your company to negative consequences. So getting these transformation initiatives right is extremely important. So why do you think initiatives fail? So I'm going to give everyone a chance. Again, we're trying to keep this interactive, to just post in the chat some of the reasons why you think digital transformation initiatives fail, or you can just comment, even if you will, on some of the experiences that you had in undertakings that you're part of. So if you guys can just, put into the chat pane some of the things. Moving targets, no lack to buy-in. Thank you, Ash. That's a very good one. Quite often requirements are changing on the fly, and there's no real plan, and it's hard to transform from A to B if you don't know where you are and where you're going. Lack of management support. Requirements are not clear. That's a really big one. Poor change management. Lack of vision, changing objectives. Changing stakeholders. Improper change management. Poor process design. That's one that's near and dear to my heart, of course. There's a lot of, thank you for that, everyone. There's a lot of really good reasons here that you folks are sharing. So what I did is I did a little bit of study on my own, and I pulled together a bit of a word cloud. And I think you guys will see things in the word cloud here that would really resonate. Unclear requirements, resistance to change, no consensus on the goals, culture, which actually, encompasses a lot of what you folks have been saying. Inability to scale. That's an interesting one. A lot of times people put a lot of work into the proof of concept, but they don't, everyone's excited about that, but when it comes time to scale this thing up, it doesn't really work. Miscommunication, an outdated technology stack. You're trying to transform on an outdated platform. Sponsorship, silos, undefined processes. That's a big one too. So yeah, I think we're all on the same page here. There's a lot of really important reasons why things fail. I do believe, though, one of the ones, and I guess they all kind of sort of fall into the same bucket, but I call it the disconnect. There is a real disconnect between the business outcomes. So as a business, what am I trying to achieve? Improved productivity? Do I want to save money, automate and enhance the business processes? What are the business outcomes that I'm trying to get? There's a disconnect between that and the actual technical implementation. And I've seen this so many times in my career where there's a lot of excitement. Perhaps we're going to move to a new platform. So we do a search, we identify some target technology that we want to move on to. Everyone's really excited. We get everything, the project initiated, and then we go into the technical implementation phase. And then there's a disconnect now from those objectives that were originally defined, and it's left into the hands of the technologists to do the implementation and nothing in between. So sometimes what you end up with I like to call it a lift and shift, but you act up with people actually implementing something that already exists because they don't have good, clear requirements on what they're supposed to implement, or they're left to their own devices to determine what needs to be done to take this technical implementation and have it aligned to the business outcomes. So I think there's, and I'm not the only one who thinks that. We're, as you know, a lot of people on this call, a lot of our customers happen to be also customers of ServiceNow. And there's an interesting quote from Dr. Anita Sands, who's on the board of directors of ServiceNow. And she's also a professor at Stanford. And she basically confirms what we're saying here. A mistake that enterprises continue to make about digital transformation is thinking it's mostly about deploying the latest technologies. And that seems where it always goes to, right? You have a business outcome, you select a platform, you immediately get to implementation. Yes, the technology obviously is a part of it, but it's also about radical and fundamental changes to every business and operating model. And I equate those business and operating models to the processes which automate what it is you're trying to transform. So I do believe that this is a key thing. It's ensuring that we don't have too much focus on the platform, and that we're actually spending enough time trying to get alignment to the. I can't believe I'm saying this. Just a side story here. When I started my career, and I won't say how many years ago, but it's been a bit. When I started my career, I had an opportunity to go to a conference. I'm just a young pup, right? And I had an opportunity to go to a conference. And the conference was all about the inability to have alignment between IT and the business. And, we fast forward, quite a number of years later, and sometimes it seems that we're having the same discussion. So anyway, I just thought that was a little funny anecdote. But I guess more importantly, right, what does this all have to do with process design and user stories? Well, I think there's a much better approach. Instead of having that disconnect from where we are with the defining the business outcomes, and a disconnect between that and the technical implementation, I think there's a better path that we can follow. So this approach still starts with understanding what those business outcomes are. So you do spend the time, working with the business, identifying your goals, identifying your objectives, getting all the right sponsorship in place, making sure all the silos are actually talking to each other in alignment. But from there, you then move into a process design phase. So you have those outcomes, but now you can sit down and say, well, how are we going to make this work in our organization? What are the activities? What are the tasks? What are the roles, the responsibilities? How are we going to measure this? You define the processes that are going to support those business objectives. And once you have a good, clear understanding of what those processes are, you can then start creating user stories. Now, user stories, for those of you who are, I'm sure most of you are familiar, but I'm just going to say that user stories are basically a natural language description of a requirement, a technical requirement, a natural language, meaning put in human terms, and from the perspective someone's going to be using the software. So it's what's called a human-centered approach. User stories have always been designed to say, how do I take this, this sort of mechanical process, and how do I put it in terms that resonate with human, and put it, empathize with the users so that I can actually build a system that actually meets the needs of the users, empathize with the users' needs. So from the process design, we go into the user stories, which really takes into account the voice of the customer. So business outcomes, process design, user stories. And then when you have that, you're in a really good position to do the technical implementation. And I see this as being the bridge between the business objectives and the technical implementation. And I'm calling this process-driven user stories. Now, one of the things I want to point out is, that seemed kind of sequential, but it doesn't mean this is a waterfall approach. Even though it's sequential, it can be iterative. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But this better approach that I think could really help put the right focus and gather the right requirements is what we're calling process-driven user stories. So what do I mean by process-driven user stories? So I have a little example here that I want to share with everybody. So we're going to start by just laying out a super, super simple process. This is very oversimplified, but I think it helps get the idea across. So this process is about expense reimbursement, employee expenses. So we start the process and the employee submits an expense form. That moves over to a next phase where a manager receives the expense report and they either approve or not approve the expense. If it's approved, the manager will submit this for payment, and then the employee will get reimbursed. So we have a nice process here. But as we go through this process, and once the process has been agreed to by the business, once we go through this process, we can now take another pass. And we can take a pass to look at the user stories. So the first thing is you can create one or more user stories for each and every one of the tasks in this process. Again, remembering, we're trying to get a user's perspective here, not a business. It's not a mechanical like employee submits user form. But why does the employee have to do that? How easy should it be for the employee to do that? What's the rationale? And they're typically written in a format such as the employee, conforming to accounting policies, must submit a detailed expense form. So you usually have a persona, you have an action, and you have a value proposition. So you would create one or more user stories for that step called employee submits expense form. And working, with the business analysts in the business, and you would and this is very much a business analysis stage here. You would go through this process and capture one or more user stories for each and every step in the process. But that's still not quite enough, because if I went to a developer and I said, here's my process where the employee submits an expense report, and I give this little user story that the employee needs to submit a detailed expense form, what does that mean? What is a detailed expense form? What I call a detailed expense form and what you call a detailed expense form can be two different things. So you need to go down to another layer, which is the technical requirements, to support that user story. So perhaps for that first story, the technical requirements might be place these specific fields on the expense form. The employee's name, the employee's ID number, the date of the expense form, different rows that represent each expense item, columns that represent a description and a value. Put these forms or put these data specifications on the form in this order. You need to create an expense report number because you got to track that through the system. You need to send a notification out to a manager. Well, what is that notification? What does the message look like? And you need to change the status, because when they start the expense submission, they might be in a draft mode. You want to change that to submitted once it's been submitted. So this decomposition here from process to user story to technical requirements gives you a step-by-step set of requirements for the entire process. And when you bring them up in totality, you've got really clear specifications. And if you have a user story or one or more user stories for each step in the process, sometimes you might not have one, but if you probably have for most, you'd be pretty confident that you gathered all of the requirements. I think a question came up here. This is from Paul. In terms of levels within process, decomposition, process, sub-processes, task, etc., where do you find the relationship between the process and the user stories? Should all tasks then at least have one user story? That's a great question, Paul. So again, semantics. I mean, make sure we're speaking the same language here. So a process in my speak, has activities. So an activity is a collection of tasks. And usually what I say is you take a complex process and you break it down into a few activities. Another way of seeing that, if you have a Visio chart of your process and you have tabs along the bottom, quite often those tabs represent, the activities. If you look at it from terms of like a ServiceNow implementation, those might be phases or states. So you have the change request is open, the change request has been submitted. And I will repeat that, Caroline. So I'll be back to that in a moment. So anyway, just back to you, Paul. So I would say that in in each activity, you have a number of tasks. Most of those tasks should have one or more user stories. Now, a sub-process is a type in business process modeling notation, is a type of task, and that opens up. It basically is collapsing a bunch of tasks into a sub-process so that you can be more efficient in your drawing. So you don't have to, it just makes things clear and more easy to understand. So when you expand a sub-process, it has tasks, and those should have probably user stories as well. So I hope that answered your question, Paul. Carolyn was asking, can you repeat the format of the user story? No problem. So it's typically written in the format, a persona. So think of a persona you might have in a system. Let's say you're implementing Salesforce. Okay, so you have a salesperson is a persona, a sales manager is a persona, maybe a marketing coordinator like Catherine is a persona in the sales process because they send out, product information, that sort of thing. So you have your various personas. So that's a cool thing because when you come back and test your system later, you test against every persona because those would have different privileges and different accesses probably. So a persona wants to perform something. So the salesperson, to get off to a good start in the morning because they need to plan their day, wants to see a comprehensive list of all the sales calls they need to make that morning. So that's kind of a user story, right? And what that basically is saying is I, as a sales guy, want to log into my screen and make it really easy. And I know I have to call these 15 people today. So that's the user story, persona, what I have to do, and what's the benefit so I can be more productive and efficient in my day. So you're really taking it from the perspective of that salesperson. And a user story usually always has something called acceptance criteria. So how do you as a tester go back and view that? Well, you can then say, well, that user story is complete when the appropriate view is available that contains X, Y, and Z. So that's the format of the user story, Carolyn. I hope that helps. All right, so we have this approach. So we started with your business objectives. We went into the process. We broke the process down into user stories. We further decomposed each user story into a series of technical requirements. And what you get from this is a set of deliverables. You get a comprehensive set of deliverables that includes a fully documented process. Now, when I say fully documented process, I don't mean a Visio. I mean, what's the description of the process, the goals, the objectives, the roles, what's the inputs, the outputs, the metrics, the policies, what are the activities, what are the tasks, what are the procedures. So, just to, again, keep us all on the same page, you come out of this process with a very detailed process document, which is used in a variety of ways. It can assist the developers because they get a good sense of what they're trying to automate. It can train users, keep all your people on the same page. So, different departments, you have a large company, everyone's doing things the same way in a consistent manner toward the same goal. So that's great. Auditors can come in and see that you have good process documentation and check that the controls are in place. But you also have a really comprehensive set of user stories and requirements. And together, that package is what's going to get you to your technical implementation. Now you have a complete set. And it wasn't done, what I would like to say, backwards. You didn't sort of start off by saying, here's the tool, and let me write the specifications from it. You basically drove the implementation from what the business wants to do. Now, there's an age-old battle, if you will, between out of the box and customization. I'm not really, I don't want to get into that too much, but organizations are complex entities. And if you're building a new initiative, the out of the box software will take you so far. It might get you 80% of the way there. It might get you 90% of the way there. But you still got to tailor it. You still got to, and again, customization versus configuration. I always err on the, good software allows you to configure it to use it the way you want. So I would always say go with configuration over customization. But in some cases, you can't get around it, and it's very difficult to get to make those determinations of what you have to configure or customize if you don't have good requirements. So the benefit here is you have comprehensive requirements that'll drive the implementation. just some additional thoughts on this process. And I mentioned this once before. You could come to me and say, geez, David, this is very sequential, right? This is a waterfall approach. This is what we used to do back in the day. And that didn't work. And that's why we become agile. No, I'm not saying that at all. You can still be agile in this because you sit around and brainstorm what these business outcomes are. And from that, you can drive process. But as you're building the process, you might learn things through the development of the process that might help shape the objectives. You might, tone down the objectives. You might increase the objectives. You might say, well, maybe the focus was a little off and we want to look at it differently. But there's an iterative approach that can happen between the business objectives and the development of the processes. One drives the process and the process can help shape the objectives. The same goes from the process to the user stories. So we went through every task in the process. We build the user stories, but now you can come back and say, well, we have user stories for steps that don't exist in the process. Because when we sat down and talked to people, so now you might have to go back and refine the process a little bit because you can't find a task in which to put that. So there is this iterative approach. And again, your stories can drive the implementation, but as you're implementing things, you might have to refine the stories. So don't think of this as a waterfall approach. Think of this as an iterative approach. For those of you who might have studied something called design thinking, this is very much in line with that. I mean, it's iterative at every stage of this process. Another thing I want to caution you of is don't reverse engineers from software functionality. And you might be surprised I'm saying that, but I've seen this happen. So when there's a lack of good requirements from the business, and when there's when there's basically a requirement to build the user stories because that's your methodology in the process for development, I've seen it where people went over to the developers and says, I need to write a user story. So what does the software do? And they kind of reverse engineer the user stories from the software as opposed to creating user stories that are actually driven from the actual users who need to perform, need to get the job done with the software. So again, don't reverse engineer stories from the software functionality. Some additional thoughts as well. It's important to stay focused on the benefits of this approach. Better alignment to the needs of the business, because you start with the business objectives. You start with the business objectives. You will end up with a technical implementation that aligns closer to it. I'm a little distracted because I saw a comment come up from Ash. Hey Ash, super common. I'm not going to say the vendor's name, but super common with vendor X. Make your processes fit the out of the box. And you know what? You can really get sold on that, right? It sounds great, man. Just get your whole organization to conform to our software. That might work well for smaller organizations, but I've seen situations. I'll tell you a quick story here. We were involved in a project with a very large insurance company, and a certain amount of time was allocated to do change management process design. And we weren't doing the design. We were basically there because we had the Navvia software, and the consultant who was coming in to lead the change management process design for this multinational organization allocated 1 day to change management process design with a workshop of half a dozen people. So in 1 day, half a dozen people were going to try and decide the change management system for this huge organization. And that's all the time that was allocated. And completely left out all of these business requirements around audit, around tracking. So many things that this organization were committed to do was not part of that out of the box implementation. So Ash, I'm glad you brought that up because that's a very important point. So thank you for that. So the other thing, when you have better alignments to the needed business, there's less rework because people aren't going to go back and say you didn't do it right because you have this nice iterative process taking you to the end game. You're always a little bit closer to it. In design thinking as well as agile, there's a term called fail fast. I think fail fast. I was talking to my colleague Carl Beach, that many of you know, and we were having a discussion. He brought this up, and a lot of times fail fast can actually get you in more trouble than you expect. So fail fast was not meant to me, is not does not equal fail often. So what do I mean by that? Fail fast means if you realize you're going in the wrong direction, the sooner you can figure that out and correct it, the better. But that also, some people take that as fail often, and that just creates a lot of churn. So anyway, less rework saves you time and money. Yeah, you want to understand when you have a problem and fail and a way to correct it, but you also would have better requirements that will save you the effort. The human-centered design, by listening to the voice of the customer, that's really important. And this is based on the principles of agile development. It's not a waterfall approach. So how do we put this theory actually into practice? So I'd like to just walk you through a little bit about what we talked about in a more practical sense. So for that, I'm going to pop over my screen. Catherine, can you confirm you can see my other screen now?
Yes, I can see.
Cool.
Perfect.
So this is the Navvia Process Designer. And for those of you not familiar, we created this software back in the day when we were a consulting company that was focused on assessing processes, designing processes, implementing processes in tools, and then doing all the documentation, all the technical requirements, and in some cases the actual technical implementation. And we built this because we saw it as a productivity tool for our own consulting practice. So that's where this tool came from. And just very quickly, it has components, and I'm not going into this very deep, but it has a component to survey the maturity of processes, so you can set a baseline and a path for improvement. It has a module that allows you to do design and capture the requirements. It has a governance component, so you can establish control objectives and collect evidence of compliance. SaaS application. So I'm going to pop in to the designer. And here in the designer, I've got some workspaces, basically folders for my process. I got a process development folder and a production process folder. Over here in production, I've got a change management process and an incident management process. And I've also got in process development, I started building that expense approval process that I showed on the PowerPoint slide earlier. So let's pop into that. So I'm just going to make the screen a little bit bigger. So I built basically a simplistic expense approval process here in the tool. A drag and drop tool, if I wanted to, throw that, let's say I want to take this shape and put it on the screen to represent a system, to show that, when the employee submits the form, it goes into System X. So, it's a drag and drop environment. You can organize your process by major activities. You can have sub-processes, all of that good stuff. So I've got the employee submits the expense form, the manager in the manager swim lane approves it, the manager submits it for payment, and then you head off into the finance department where the employee is reimbursed. So we provided in the Navvia tool the ability to capture a significant amount of information behind these shapes. So the employee submits an expense form. Well, let's give it a description. So the employee submits a completed expense form and all the relevant receipts. Again, this is just very simple here. You might want to put a more thorough description. We got some roles involved with this. So I've got the employee, and he or she is responsible for filling in the expense form. So I've got that role. I've got some inputs and outputs. I've got two user stories here. So if I pop into user stories, you can see I have a user story for notify manager upon a submission and submission of expense reports. So let me go into notify manager upon, let me do submission of expense reports. So submission of expense reports. The employee, conforming to the accounting policy, submits a detailed expense form. The acceptance criteria: ensure all relevant fields are on the form, ensure mandatory fields are honored, ensure an expense report number is generated. Again, I'm keeping it very simple here for the description. You can get a little more verbose if you like. For the notify manager upon submission, which is another task in the process, the manager receives notification of all submitted expense reports so that they can be addressed in a timely manner. So you got a persona, you got the action, receives notification, and you got the benefit addressed in a timely manner. And you've got some acceptance criteria. You want to ensure the employee's manager does get the notification, that the employee is copied on the notification, and that the correct notifications occur, that I get notified from my employees, not someone else's. So we've got these stories. That's great. And I can continue, to build out stories for each of these steps in the process. So again, very systematic. I can drill down and capture some procedures and notes. Now, one of the things that the Navvia tool does that's kind of unique, something no other tool really does, is it takes from this and the data that was collected, and it generates a whole bunch of documentation. So the first thing I want to point out is I got these profiles here. So because everything's in a database, I can filter it through these profiles to create unique deliverables for different audiences. So if I want to have an executive summary, I'll check that and produce the document. So now from what I drew a moment ago, I've got a process guide, little table of contents here with description, scope, goal, objectives, roles, the RACI chart inserted, and all the way down to the flow diagram inserted. So everything I update in Navvia just basically is used to automatically create this. But for a completely different audience, I can create a completely different document. So if I look at the user story format, we put it through a different filter, if you will, change the cover page, different table of contents. If I go into user stories, user stories are a simple description of desired features told from the perspective of the person who needs the new capability. So I've got the submission of expense report. The employee fills in the form, acceptance criteria. I got the project it's associated with and the epic it's associated with. And then attached to that user story are all the fields that are needed to support this particular story. So first of all, I see the task that it's involved with, the employee name, the employee ID, the expense item, the item description, the monetary amount, the expense report number. Then I have my next user story with the tasks that are associated with that. So basically, as I'm building everything out, I'm creating two separate documents here in this example, an executive summary of the process and a set of user story documentation. It gets even more detailed than this, because if I go one step deeper and I go into a section of Navvia called specifications for the expense approval process, I can see my stories here. And if I open up a story like submission of expense report, I can now see all of the relevant data. So the project, the epic, the status, the priority, level of effort, the due date, all of this could have been optionally included in the document if you check the right boxes. I got some notes here. And then I've got my associated items, and I can see what I've associated. And if I need to associate more data specs or email notifications or anything to it, I just go to associate an item, pick the type of item I want to associate. So if I want to associate a data spec, I can add a new one right here on the fly. So it could be another, a different field, the description of the field, the format of the field, the help text of the field, comments, special instructions. So I'm able to create a very comprehensive user story. And it differs from a lot of user stories because most user stories I see don't have those technical specifications attached to them. So they're still somewhat abstract without the technical specifications. The other thing that this allows you to do is go up a level, where I can go to this little tab here called Agile Development, and I could see user stories for every process in Navvia across the whole system. So if I'm a manager, like a project manager, or if I'm a Scrum lead or somebody, I can see all of my users. Well, first of all, I can see all of my projects, all of my epics, all of my user stories, and then drill into the detail of each and every user story across the whole system. So the first view I was looking at just from the expense approval process perspective. From the other view, I was looking at it more from the whole organization perspective. But it doesn't stop there, because this data needs to be, submitted and provided to folks. So what we did is we created a bridge between Navvia through our API, and with the first integration being to a product called ServiceNow, which for those of you who don't know is a ticketing system. So we've got this ability to take all of the information that's designed in Navvia and put it across the API into ServiceNow. So I have ServiceNow up and running here. So I'm able to explore my system. So when I explore my system, I have tons of workspaces here. So I can filter and look for David's space. I can see the change management process. So I have the ability now, I'm right in ServiceNow, to make a call to Navvia and say, bring in an executive summary of the process. So in real time, I'm going off across the secure API, and I'm going to bring the process documented, formatted based on that profile I set before. So you can really customize this for your look and feel. But I bring the document over here into ServiceNow, and I can import it. I can also interrogate all of the technical information. So I've got approvals, assigned to. These are all the data specs for the change management process. So they're all here. But I can also look at the user stories. And if this had X number of user stories, I can select the user story and import that to ServiceNow, which in turn actually creates the user story in ServiceNow and appends to that user story all of the associated data. So if I were to go in to ServiceNow and look at my stories, and I'll filter and look for change form. So here's the story. I've got the short description, the acceptance criteria. I've got some of the Navvia fields that are brought across, some notes, project name, project description, etc. We have the normal tabs, scrub tasks, prerequisites, stories, dependent stories, but we add to that process documents, data specifications, tool specs, triggers, state transitions, notification content, notifications. This one's missing a tab here, but documents, if you want to associate a screenshot of a wireframe of the form, you can associate it here. All of that comes across. So there's a lot of ways you can use this documentation here within ServiceNow. So if I go back to the processes that I've imported, any of these processes that I import, I can actually bring up the process document. Oh, that one didn't have one. Sorry. I can bring up the process. I'll just go to a different change process. I can bring up the process document. I can request approval, which will circulate this document through a ServiceNow workflow for approval. See, it's gone into a pending approval state. I can go ahead and approve that document. I can publish that. I can then create a knowledge article directly from this process. So I've just created knowledge article from it. I can set a related app, which I can tie an incident process document to an incident module within ServiceNow. So there's a lot of great features that you can do. So the value proposition, just to bring this into perspective, is you've done all the business analysis work in Navvia, from process to user stories to technical design requirements, produced all the deliverables and documentation. Now you can just use those manually through exported spreadsheets, etc., and give them to your developer, or you can send them across the API where they can be consumed in another product. So I have a bunch of questions that are coming in and a bunch of comments. So I'm going to open it up for discussions here. Let's see. So I have one comment here. The user story embedded in the process is a very strong feature. I'm curious to know if there's an integration between Navvia and ServiceNow to bring over user stories. So I guess I answered that question already. So yes, actually, I just want to be clear on this. That feature goes live on Saturday. So this webinar is just in advance of the feature going live. So on Saturday, you will be able to bring user stories directly across into ServiceNow. So there's a question, someone's asking me that our current version of the tool does not include the agile development option in it. How do we obtain it? So Michael, Catherine, if you can make a note, what we'll do is we'll send Michael the knowledge article on how to get access to the ServiceNow application integration. And Michael, it's really easy to set up. So, and it's a free plugin on the ServiceNow App Store for the agile development option. So we'll get that information to you, not a problem. Is Navvia integrated into ServiceNow for all your clients? Joseph, that's a good question. It's optional. So not all our clients are ServiceNow customers. So the API is available to anybody. So anyone can access information across the API. And we do have plans on integrating to other platforms. One that's a noted platform is Jira, for example, to get user stories directly into Jira. Another one is Azure DevOps. It's really up to the client as to whether or not they integrate. So if you're a ServiceNow and Navvia customer, you can go to the ServiceNow App Store, download the plugin, follow the instructions, get that connection. It's very secure, API keys are required, etc. And there's training on how to get started on that. Thank you for that comment. Do we have to update the ServiceNow module for the integration? Yes, there's going to be a separate module. So all of this stuff is available with the existing plugins for ServiceNow. You can still get everything. You can still bring the information across. To automatically publish the user stories requires an upgrade to another plugin, and we can provide you information on that, Armin. So there's a question about linking to multiple instances of ServiceNow. So Navvia has a feature where you can actually have multiple instances of Navvia. So this is I think this is from Jillian. Hey, Jillian. So depending on the version of Navvia you can have a multi-instance version of Navvia, and each and every one of the what we call subclients of Navvia can be connected to a different instance of ServiceNow. So that could be an option for you. If you want any further clarification, we're going to give you some contact information, and I can give, we can have a more detailed discussion. But there are methods to be linked to more than one instance of ServiceNow. It just depends on what version of Navvia that you have. And Joseph's looking for that information as well. Joseph, I assume you're looking for the information to get the plugins. So Catherine, if you can make note of that. All of these the chat's being recorded anyway, right, Catherine?
Yep.
Yeah, so we'll have all this in the chat. Yeah. Is the story number visible in Navvia after it's created, or do you have to view it in SDLC? Hey, Lori, that's an awesome question. Today, it's just unidirectional. So once we publish it to ServiceNow, you can always update the stories. You can send revised stories back to ServiceNow. But once published in ServiceNow, it was our belief that people would manage it there, and they wouldn't be managing it. But right now, the integration is unidirectional, and we do have plans to make it bidirectional. But with the first iteration, it's going to be unidirectional. And Joseph, you'll get the knowledge article as well. Subathra, is the integration meant to serve the purpose for just user stories? No, it's not just user stories. So here's a couple of use cases. We've worked hard on building a process. Now I want to circulate it to the document, and I want to circulate it to all the key stakeholders for approval. You might want to use a ServiceNow workflow to do that. So we built that as part of the integration. So the process document can be attached to a workflow, circulated. You can receive your approvals and then manage a document approval that way. Another use case is from a click of a button, you can produce a knowledge article from a process that came across. So there are other use cases for the integration. It's not just user stories. Knowledge articles, documentation approval, attaching a document, for example, the change management process. You can attach it to every change record automatically. So someone creates a change record, they have a hyperlink right to the process document. And I'm not talking whatever document you choose to give them. It doesn't have to be a 60-page document. It can be just the flowcharts. Gives them easy access to the information they need to do their job. So there's a bunch of use cases for it. Donald, the level of effort to implement the plugin it's really simple. From my experience, it just requires someone with basic admin skills. You might want to do some customization of a form if you don't like the Navvia view that we've included with the integration. But I've been told, from people who have implemented, it's under an hour to get the whole thing going. So it's not hard at all. Thanks, Jillian. I appreciate that feedback. All right, so I think we're coming up to the end of today's session. I will stick around to answer any more questions. But I just want, before I get into any more questions, I just want to say thank you for all of you that did attend today's session. We very much appreciate it. If you want to learn more about process-driven user stories and specifically how we've implemented that in the Navvia Process Designer, you can do so by reaching out to us at navvia.com/contact. Now, Catherine did mention earlier that you're able that we're going to be sending out a link to these slides as well as a link to the recording. So you'll be able to also respond to that email if you want to set up a more detailed meeting. We got more questions coming in. Oh, hey, Joe. Good to see you online. If you initiate an Epic or feature in ServiceNow, then define the process in Navvia, do you have the ability to link the process back? Yeah, okay. So that's a little more detailed question, Sheila. But yes, the short answer is yes, because you don't have to specify the Epic. You can just have the stories in Navvia and then create the story, and then you just go to the drop downs and connect it to the Epic in the project. So the short answer is yes, but we'd be happy to go into that in more detail. Ash, will I be able to share this presentation with my leadership? Of course. And if you're interested, we'd be able to do custom presentations for anybody who would like one. So if anyone wants to deliver this internally, we can set up a call and just do a 1-hour presentation to your leadership team if that's something you think is important. And Armin, we still have some hours available. Yep, definitely you can use those hours for anything you want, actually, Armin. Thank you, Joe. Yes, will this additional information become available in the training links modules? Yes, all of the, you're going to start seeing a number of pop-ups occur in Navvia for those of you who are Navvia customers with links to all the training documentation, recorded training, this presentation, all this stuff's going to be available in the knowledge base. Joseph, really appreciate that. That's so nice of you to say that. Yep. Yes, definitely. For those of you asking, a number of you are asking about the recording and slide deck. Yep, you're going to get that. Don't worry about it. To be clear, Dan, yes, you should see this on Sunday is when or end of day on Saturday. Oh, you're quite welcome, Michael. All right, that looks like, again, I can stick around for a few more minutes if anyone wants, but it looks like the questions have slowed down. So that was great. It's really nice to get a lot of interaction there. So I really appreciate all of that. Oh, Joseph, you said Catherine, do you see that last chat?
Yes, I am seeing. So
okay. Sometimes these things go to spam folders or whatever. So Joseph, Catherine will help you out with that.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate that. All right. This is awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, so if I hope to eventually get to see some of you again. That would be nice. I hope you guys are all enjoying your summer, and things are opening up everywhere, so that's always exciting. And I do appreciate you all for being here. So to everyone, from behalf of myself and Catherine, enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Bye for now.